decade since the death of prolific sex abuser Jimmy Savile and the following explosive exposure of his horrific crimes against over 500 victims.
As a new Netflix documentary, Jimmy Savile, a British horror story, focuses on the life and crimes of the TV personality. And we're now joined by Mark Williams-Thomas, who exposed Savile in 2012, and biographer Alison Bellamy, who says she was betrayed by the man she once regarded as a close friend, to examine how Savile committed such atrocities under the nose of the great British public.
Now, before we talk to Mark and Alison, let's have a look. And we did. Mark, Alison, welcome. How does that make you feel watching that? Alison?
Well, it makes me feel, you know, a bit upset. I did know him. I was a reporter on the regional paper in Leeds. And as, you know, you cover stories about if you've got a celebrity living in your town, you would cover him, you know, former showbiz star. So I covered his charity fundraising events, and over a number of years, I got to know him quite well. We used to go out for lunch. And I must say, I never felt uneasy with him. He never gave me a moment's fear, but I think everyone who Jimmy knew had a use for, you know, he had a use. So I would write good news stories about him. And, you know, he kept all his press cuttings meticulously, and
that's
he
something
loved...
that features heavily in the documentary,
yes,
isn't it?
Yes. And, you know, what can I say? I knew him, and when, you know, when then the news came out about the scandal, I was quite devastated. You know, it was awful. It was awful to hear that as it was revealed. You know, I could hardly believe it.
Mark, explain to us your connection, because you're the guy that carried out the initial investigation, is that right?
Yeah, so 2011, I was coming back from France doing a piece for BBC Newsnight, and the producer said to me, "Have you ever heard of Jimmy Savile being a sex offender?" And I said, "No, he's a weird bloke, but I've never heard that." Anyway, I did some investigations, established he had been investigated by the police. They were then going to do a BBC Newsnight programme. It didn't happen. And I said, I'll take it on and see if we can do it for ITV. And we took probably 15% of their work, and we had to build the rest of it, you know, to get to a position where we could put a programme out. And it was really difficult. I mean, the full story about how difficult it was to get the programme broadcast has never been revealed. It was massively difficult. But finally we did. We got the nation on board. The public turned on our side.
Was it difficult because of the content and the allegations?
Yeah, because of who he was. You know, this is a man who had such massive
Jimmy Savile
status.
himself, the name Jimmy Savile, it was difficult to put this programme on air because it was him.
Massive status. I mean, at those days, there was only two broadcasts. It was BBC and ITV. And this man had total control. I mean, the audience figures now spread across all the different platforms are, you know, a couple of million. But in those days, we were talking 15, 20 million.
Well, he says in the documentary himself, I have an audience of 65 million every week.
Phenomenal, phenomenal. Such a powerful man, and to get it out there. But we managed to turn the tide. I mean, from the day that we first hit the headlines, which was a couple of days before broadcast on the 3rd of October 2012, it sat on the front pages for 41 consecutive days. And what this programme does is it does very well in terms of giving the story in the background. It talks about some of the religious, political elements, his connections, his royal family and everything like that. My slight worry with it is that it sensationalises it rather than demonises him as an individual. And I do worry as far as victims goes. One of the things that strongly gets criticised now when the story is talked about is seeing his face, his picture on the front page. And if you consider how many victims there are out there, I mean, when we started looking at this, the Metropolitan Police came to see me 3 days after the case hit the headlines, when they were directed from the Commissioner to start up Operation Newtree. And I remember sitting with him in ITV Towers, and he said to me, I reckon there's probably 30 victims. And I said, more like 500. And of course, that's what it turned out to be. But for those victims to see his face consistently over and over and again, that is very traumatic for them. And what we mustn't forget, of course, is that it's great to tell a story, and it's important, we mustn't forget that. But what we mustn't ever forget is the victims who have been through so much torment to be in this position.
Yeah, absolutely.
To have to watch him on TV and be adored like he was. And it seemed like, I mean, watching him now, you can see how creepy he is. But at the time, he was so adored, and he just felt like he had his tentacles everywhere. How did he manage to get away with it for that long?
Well, I think, and Alison will testimony to this, you know, those people that got to know him, those people that were around him, this was a man who was a consummate professional in much of what he did. He did a lot of charity work. But deep down, he was an offender. He offended in the 1950s when he first started. His particular offending was violence in the early days up in Leeds and Manchester, and then it moved particularly into child abuse.
He used to be a doorman, didn't he? It says in the documentary.
Yeah, he was a doorman. He was a
semi-professional wrestler.
Yeah, he was. I mean, in the early days, he muted a lot of the violence himself. He then got other people to do it, and in fact, in his latter years, because he knew so many people, he would often then say, "Well, I can do this and I can do that." And then, in fact, in his latter years, he was very litigious. He used to get letters all the time from people, from victims would write to him.
And that's really interesting because those letters, as you know, Alison, were then passed on to police forces and they put them to one side, it seems. Alison, how do you think he was hiding in plain sight?
Well, I think hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? I think because he seemed to be a bit of an oddball, a weirdo, an eccentric, if you like, you know, what people would think is, you know, it wasn't a surprise to hear rumours. We'd all heard them, not just in media circles and journalism. You know, it's the British public. It wasn't a shock to hear it.
And I think because you were at the Yorkshire Post, it would have been, those rumours would have been, what's the word I'm looking for? More common, I guess, because it was Jimmy's area.
Well, I suppose they were everywhere, you know. The society as a Britain, you know, Britain as a society as well had heard the rumours. It wasn't a shock. You know, nobody was saying he's not. It was just there. But, I mean, I don't think it's the sort of thing Jimmy would sit and discuss with anyone.
He was a total eccentric, but that eccentricity of him enabled him to do what he wanted. I mean, this is a man who said he'd done, I don't know how many marathons, you know, 30, 40, 50 marathons. He finished 2 marathons. He used to get his Rolls Royce to pick him up halfway along.
Hang on, say that again.
No.
Yeah, he didn't finish. He finished about 2 marathons from beginning to end. He used to get his Rolls Royce to pick him up and then drop him off close to the finish line.
So he's always been a total con man?
Total con man. I mean, he used to get charged, or he used to charge a formidable amount of money in order to go to fairs. He'd turn up at these fairs, he'd be there for about 5 minutes, and then he'd go. I mean, he was very good at what he did. I mean, he made his money in the halls of getting young children to come to music venues, pay a couple of pounds up in Manchester in the early days, and he massively made it. And then he continued to do that. And I wrote in the Radio Times back in 2012 that I think he used his television programmes as a vehicle for his offending. I mean, this is a man who offended in such a degree. What better than to have a programme like Jim Will Fix It, where you would have young children there? But you look at some of the clips. I mean, this massive archive programme. You look at some of the clips when he sat on the steps of his van and he's talking about being in court next week.
Next Thursday. Always next Thursday in the documentary. I mean, next Thursday. I mean, next Thursday. It was a running gag that he kept saying over and over. And there's one thing that I found fascinating is he told us that he wasn't a good person. He told us, but he used it as a gag.
He had loads of catchphrases, so he'd always say, "It might all end tomorrow." And in hindsight now, you know, what was he meaning? But he said that quite often when I was with him.
Alison, you wrote his biography. I mean, what was the process of that like? Did you not pick up on anything at all?
Well, I did. Despite much disparaging, the rumours are addressed in the biography. I did address them, and at the time there were no victims. I hadn't heard of no victims then, and you know, there were no charges, no cases ongoing. I checked with police forces around Britain. You know, I contacted Sussex, Essex Police and everyone. There were no, you know, there was nothing. So I did address the rumours, left them in the book, like I had to, you know, as a good biographer and a journalist. I mean, you know, I'm not going to miss a story. I was young and ambitious. I would have chased the story if I had it. I'd also, when he was 80, I did a series of features and I asked him directly about the rumours, which was mortifying. I said, what about these rumours that you've got a fondness for little girls? And he just made a joke, brushed it off and said, oh, it comes with the territory. People were queuing up outside my dressing room door. You know, he was saying things like that. And it was just, he made a big joke out of it, changed the subject with a catchphrase. And, you know, what else could I do?
The sad reality is the authorities knew. The authorities could have stopped him much earlier. There was a young boy that went into a police station, accused him of a serious sexual offence, and the front desk sergeant laughed it off and said, go home. There was another case where a letter was written to New Scotland Yard setting out very clearly Savile's offending behaviour. It was dismissed as being anonymous. There were opportunities, but they just didn't do anything about it.
I don't think he would get away with that now. I think times have changed.
Internet, social media and forums.
In a different way. There are offenders out there. Of course there are offenders operating, but not to the same degree as him.
And youngsters, children are very aware now, even, you know, using Instagram and TikTok, about
There's lots of education
what's acceptable and what's not. Yeah, so that's what's great.
And huge changes have come about since 2012. You know, the programme created a tidal wave of changes, both within the Crown Prosecution Service, within the police and the public. You know, as a direct result of that programme, the NSPCC wrote to us at ITV and said in excess of 1,000 children, both current and past, have been saved as a result of your programme.
Well, at least, I know it's disgusting, but at least something has come out of it. So thank you very much for joining us, Mark. And Alison, that must have been really hard for you, so thank you very much for joining us today.